What was the best you have no power here moment you have ever seen? I used to work for a super cunty manager when I worked at McDonald's. This guy was horrible to us. He was constantly bullying us, speep talking us to customers, and doing everything in his power to make us miserable. Well, so many people complained about him that he ended up getting fired. New manager was great. He was super chill and understanding with us all. A couple weeks after he took over, the old douchebag comes in and starts talking about how terrible the store looks, how our service is speedier than ever, and how much this store needs him. The new manager looked at him and said, if you don't leave, then the cops are gonna make you. When the douchebag didn't move, new awesome manager stuck to his guns and called the cops. The douchebag is no longer allowed on any McDonald's property in the city and has a restraining order against him. You know he's a douchebag because he came back to where he got fired from. The first time I had dinner at my parents' house after I got my own apartment, my dad was giving me grief as usual. Finally, I stood up and said, I don't live here anymore. I don't have to put up with you this way any longer. I'm going home. And walked out. Most liberating moment of my life. It's funny. I have an 18-year-old. And just tonight I was saying to him to remember that he has the right to walk away when he's being mistreated, whether it is by us, a boss, or whomever. It took me way too long into adulthood to realize it on my own. Kudos to you for figuring it out early. I've also stressed with him growing up that he should always commit part of his money to savings, to what I call the FPPU fund. I see it as giving someone the freedom and resources to save FPPU and leave situations as needed. I told my ex I was getting remarried. He told me he was going to stop me and put a lien on my house, which I bought with my money 6 years after the divorce. My son would come home from visitations telling me how his dad was going to stop the wedding and I'd have to pay him all of this money. La dida. Get to court. His attorney goes blah 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 for what felt like forever. My lawyer, yes. I had to freaking get one, stands up and simply hands the judge the divorce papers showing the disbursement of funds and how my ex isn't owed anything. Judge looks at ex's lawyer and basically asks, did you even ask for this document before filing? And dismisses the case. A while back, I got a job as a popcorn monkey in the local cinema. As a temporary thing while I figured out what the FPP I was doing with my life. There was a supervisor that had worked there since the site opened around 5 years who was a total bitch and had had numerous complaints about her from countless staff. In the first week, I nearly quit because of her attitude. As an example, one night I was on a close and basically cleaned the entirety of the front of house on my own. I stopped to take a drink of water and she marched up to me going, we don't pay you to stand around drinking, you know. To which I calmly responded that I was thirsty and needed a drink of water. And if she wanted to tell me I wasn't allowed to have a glass of water, then good luck. But I'm pretty sure health and safety would have something to say about that. She huffed about not having had a break all day, which I ignored cause not my FPPing problem. But internally I was put out about it, because it was totally FPPing pointless to be such a twat about things. About 2 weeks in I get promoted to supervisor, as I was clearly extremely competent by their usual standards. I could walk and fart at the same time, but she also gets promoted to floor manager. So she continues to work her little power trips and try and lord it over me and everyone else. 4 weeks after that, I get another promotion to floor manager. And at this point we're equals. So she can't boss me around anymore. So instead, she tries a different tack, which is to try and lord it over me with her superior knowledge of processes, where to find stuff, etc. My response is to go saccharine sweet, oh thanks. That's so helpful. I mean, you know how things work so much better than me. Because you've been here 5 years. And I've only been here 6 weeks. She had a face like a smacked arse. It was delightful. I get promoted to supervisor as I was clearly extremely competent by their usual standards. I could walk and fart at the same time. I try not to think of myself as incompetent. But damned if I can't walk and fart at the same time. I have to stop to toot. X and I were moving out after a breakup. Cleaning out garage. She was being critical of my post-breakup plan of moving in with a co-worker until I could find a better place to live. As most options weren't great. I took a deep breath and laughed. This puzzled her. "Why are you laughing?" she asked. I collected myself and said, "Because this is the last time I have to listen to this. You don't get to be critical of anything I ever do. Ever again." It was a really great feeling. Because I literally thought of the "you have no power here" as I laughed. TLDR, a pair of angry moms threatened legal action if I fired their useless kids. I worked for a trampoline park franchise. We opened a sister location that I ran for about a year and a half before moving back to take over the old location. When I got back, a lot needed fixing, but in particular there were 2 teenage employees that had been fired/suspended on numerous occasions. They were generally lazy, rude jackasses that shouldn't have been hired in the first place. Problem was, they both had aggressive helicopter moms that intimidated the manager into rescinding any punishments. Once I came back, I took stock of our employees and had a long talk with the entire leadership team. I learned which employees caused which problems, who was unreliable, who had a regular habit of skipping shifts, texting on shift, etc. I fired about a half dozen that first week, including those 2 I mentioned. That night, both moms called my personal cell to scream at me. Our numbers are listed in the online scheduling tool so employees can find shift covers more easily. They demanded to know why I fired them, threatened to sue, have me arrested, accused me of discrimination against their white middle-class sons, etc. I simply asked, "Is your son over 18? Yes. So you're demanding I illegally release personal information regarding a former adult employee? Bye." Not me. But a story my dad used to tell me all the time. So my biological grandmother was very emotionally abusive. She was very controlling and tried to keep people within her sphere of influence. There's a reason why my grandfather divorced her. In high school my dad had a job washing airplanes at an airport in our area, which he absolutely loved. He's a huge fan of aircraft in general. He had classes until roughly 10 a.m. and then he'd be off to work until around 10 p.m. It was what he loved. He didn't mind long hours being around aircraft all day. But one day he came home a little too late for his mom's liking. She said she'd take his keys to his motorcycle and that he'd lost privileges to it. The fact of the matter is that he bought the motorcycle himself and he needed it to get to school as well as work. He laughed in her face and she didn't do anything. She couldn't do anything. I'm a high school teacher who teaches a lot of senior grades and so has to deal with graduation grades, references for university, all that jazz. I had a parent of a graduating kid in my classroom in June after final marks were given to students but not formally reported, who was a dental surgeon in town. Ran a large operation. Donated a lot to local man in a small town. I had given his kid a mark in the high B range. And so he marched into my office and started off with the "there must be some mistake" line, which moved swiftly into the "you're going to change it because I tell you to how much will it cost to get him the A." When I refused the bribe he went to "you're fired." 1. Not "I'm going to get you fired" but "you're fired. Clean out your desk." I just asked him to leave. Ended badly. He threatened violence. I reported him to the school admin. He's now banned from the property. Mr. I pay your salary so you work for me, you lousy piece of shit, was threatened with the cops by Mr. Random Act PG. I was waiting for a friend to finish work. She worked at a restaurant so fancy they had someone vetting guests at a podium outside. The place was glitzy and the folks were glam, so the great and good would descend in droves. Those with a reservation were sent in. Prospective walk-ins had to queue. A car sweeps up. The driver jumps out and holds the door open to unleash a hat and dress. The woman accompanying said finery, a C-list actress from a regional daytime TV show, looked through everyone present and moved to enter. She froze, appalled, when the guest vetter intercepted, asking, "Do you have a reservation?" She mustn't have heard the question because she didn't respond. Instead she drew herself up to the full height of her couture and demanded, "Do you know who I am?" "Yes," said the maitre d'. "Back of the queue." Oof. LOL, I did the same when I was bouncing. I was out policing the queue when a group came over to me and asked if I could get them in for free ahead of the queue. Apparently one of them was some big shot soccer player. But I don't like sport and didn't care, so told the lot of them to queue like everyone else. The number of times security radioed me to come tell some Instagram model that no, she can't jump ahead of the 25 people waiting to come in because she has like 50,000 followers is infuriating. Nope, you're going to have to wait like everyone else. Small amount of fame really does go to people's heads. This is a bit silly, but gave me a great feeling of satisfaction. Due to the bad economy and poor money management, my parents have moved into the spare room of the house my husband and I bought a year ago. Things are mostly smooth, though I'm not the closest to them for several reasons I won't go into here. The other evening I was out gardening because it's hot during the day and we have the luck of having a street light right next to our front yard, keeping it pretty well illuminated even after sundown. I mostly garden at night, and I thought I had gotten the hose twisted, as it kept getting stuck. This went on for a bit, when I realized that it wasn't stuck, but being pulled. I looked into the dim area just past the illumination of the street light and spied my father, crouched over and tugging the hose. Well, I did the only reasonable thing to do, and I sprayed him. He yelled and ran inside with me chasing. Once he got inside he made a face and goes, "You can't get me now. I'm inside." In that father to daughter "Don't you make a mess" tone of voice. I readied my hose, looked him in the eye and said, "It's my house," and just peeping let loose with the hose. He was soaked. Worth cleaning up the mess for that moment of true fear in his eyes. Edit. Thanks for all the appreciation. I'm glad my silly story made your day better. This is the most wholesome speep I've ever heard in my life. This was great. Woman complained we wouldn't fill her clearly fraudulent C2 prescription. Brought the brand new store manager back to the pharmacy to make us fill it. She says you have to fill it. God himself cannot make us fill anything if it fails the checks. No. Oh. I have a story for this. I got married 2 years ago overseas. Because my wife is from Europe, and they have cool castles and speep. My Canadian family and friends all came over because most had never been. We're a little older, and well off, so we splurged. Wedding was awesome. Dinner amazing. Reception is in full swing. And quite frankly, it's a little warm. Warm for us Canadians. It was around 10 C. In early November. When you mix in wool suits, drinking, and lots of dancing. Some of us colonists were working up a bit of a sweat. Thankfully, the venue had a balcony with huge doors. I kept going over and opening them. as some folks were inside. Some were outside. And there was a nice breeze. But I had to keep going over, because they were shut whenever I looked back. Finally, after the 5th or 6th time, this guy followed me, and demanded I keep the doors shut because it was cold inside. I didn't know who he was, so he must have been a one of someone on my wife's side. So I was mighty confused when he said, and I quote, "Who the hell do you think you are keeping these doors open? And the temperature so low inside? I'm the guy who bought you dinner." I watched him go over to my now cousin-in-law and grab his coat and almost pull her out the front door. I thought one of my groomsmen was going to burst. He laughed so hard. The guy that I'd gone on a few dates with introduced me to his parents. Things went well. Or so I thought. He drives me home. We end up talking and drinking a few beers. I didn't want him on the road with any alcohol in his system, and I enjoyed his company. So we end up hanging out until 3 a.m. His mom starts blowing up his phone, demanding that he comes home. So he drives himself home to find that he's been locked out of his house. His mom said that he can sleep outside. He shouldn't be spending time with someone like me. Still don't know what she meant by that. And that I'm just another stop on the pussy train. He tells her not to talk about me like that. To which she says, "When you're under my roof, I'll say whatever I want about whoever I want." So he picks up his phone, calls me, asks if he can stay at my place for a little while. It's been 7 years. We're engaged. Have a dog, a cat, and a happy life. I also plan on throwing some subtle train themes into the wedding/celebration after the end of the plague. In your vows say something like, "I'm glad I'm the last stop on the pussy train for you." Don't forget in your thank you speech to include your mill. Without your words of support and wisdom, I wouldn't be married to your son and riding the train of happiness today, or something better. Some secretary of some branch of a state agency would go on a power trip and stamp, "Do not copy," on things that she sent to local agencies. Well, I work for an oversight agency and I needed a copy. Locals were terrified, so I rolled my eyes and called to explain that the locals and I were basically the same entity. Woman started to have a conniption fit, but she got real quiet when I cut her off and said, "Fine. I'll issue a subpoena. What's your name and job title?" She answered, and the sheriff served her a subpoena for what I wanted. Guess she wasn't used to that. I grew up with my parents having screaming arguments over every little thing. They do love each other. Over 50 years of marriage so far testifies to that, and it always upset me. A couple of days ago, they popped into my house to visit for a coffee on their way to stay with friends a few miles away. Within minutes, they were yelling at each other. I took great pleasure in telling them that I would not stand for such behavior in my house, and if they didn't lower their voices, they could stand outside until they learned some manners. The meek apologies tasted so sweet, as did the coffee. IT services for a client of mine. They paid for me to come to their office and address a problem. 8 HRS minimum time. The issue was resolved in about 45 minutes. They'd set up something incorrectly and it was pretty obvious once I got into the system. I was packing up to leave and the client stopped me. "What are you doing?" "The system is fixed, so I'm headed out back to my office." "No. I paid for 8 hours. You'll do your 8 hours. If I tell you to wash my car for 8 hours, that's what you'll be doing. Anyway, I'm leaving. I'll notify the office to send you the invoice, and in all likelihood we'll no longer be working with you and withdrawing your lease on our equipment." A client once paid for me to fly to New York and spend 2 nights in a nice Manhattan hotel to add a semicolon to a config file. I went to Boston from Atlanta to flip a switch to on.